All right, so we're jumping into a little time lapse here. I'm about ready to dig in and start working on the fender flares, but there's a few little sections here I want to deal with, like this little area around the headlight here. I just kind of want to flesh this out a little bit more before we do the fender flares. So I just thought it was worthy. I don't like doing things off camera, so there's not a lot explaining going on here, but I think it's worthy to see, just kind of see how I deal with this little section right here where it curves around. Now you can see my reference there that we have a part of the hood or the part of the front fender that's actually car painted, and it's like a different object almost, like we see that seam around there. So I'm not building that yet. We'll get to that later. I would say that's more of like a secondary form. We can still build off of our primary form with that, but I'm going to wait to do that because that's a separate object, and it's just going to be easier if we think about it as a separate object. So I'm just trying to get to build it out up to the point sort of leading up to that. And then there's also that part below the little crease. You see that little crease under the bumper there, the chrome bumper. I need to model that because I don't have that in there yet either. That you'll see that on my reference here in a few minutes. But I'm just sort of tweaking things. Basically all the same stuff that I'm doing using my bridge tool, my multi-cut tool quite a bit, and I'm just trying to form out that shape. Right there, I was just looking at the seam. That little part right there there's a seam, so that whole headlight fixture is going to come off at some point. So here I'm just kind of establishing the edge loop that's going to make that seam, just trying to get that evenly spaced all around. And then it cuts off under there almost at like a 90-degree angle. So that's what I'm doing right here. Basically same tools that I've been using so far. It's not perfect, but I think that is good enough. And there I realized when I looked in my orthographic views, you'll see me kind of look back at it here in a second. But I'm realizing that my whole model has moved. Maybe I don't realize it yet here, but I do realize that in a few minutes that my whole model has moved down and kind of offset from my instance. You can see it a little bit right there, that the whole thing has moved down. And here I'm kind of, at some point I'm going to realize that. I think right there I'm probably realizing, crap, my whole model has moved around. So I check my transforms and I see that there is some transforms. So I just zero out those transforms. But then I realize that everything is kind of setting back a little bit further than I want it to be from the side view. And so I just kind of move everything forward. Now I may be messing things up a little bit in the top view. That's something that I didn't go back and check, but we can always go back and check and tweak that. But I think I do kind of want to have the whole car a little bit longer. And here I'm just modeling out that part under the crease. Next, I want to talk to you. We're going to cut back out of the time lapse and we're going to go into real time. And I want to talk to you about adding subdivision or adding edge loops, which is an important topic to cover. So we're going to jump out of a time lapse and I'm going to start talking to you about that stuff here in a moment. All right, now I think we're ready to start working on our fender flares. I do want to just pause for a moment and talk about something first. And basically what's bringing this up is I'm seeing that I'm probably going to want to add in an edge loop right here. So I could just kind of add in an edge loop there, but I want to talk about something and why I'm hesitant to do that in this situation. You want to be careful about adding edge loops. Now, so far we've kind of added very few edge loops in this way, where you just kind of click and add an edge loop all the way around. We've been pretty intentional about our placement of edge loops so far, and we've been working with a low amount of geometry, and um, it's we just haven't done a lot of this yet. So I want to take a moment and talk about the downside of just adding edge loops like this. So if we have a round surface, so I'm just going to grab this cylinder here, and whoops, it's weird. I don't know what happened there. Let's just create another one. I think I just scaled it up oddly. Let's just create another one, and we'll rotate it like 90 degrees. And I'm just going to delete those interior faces just so we're looking at that curved surface. So here's the issue with just adding edge loops willy-nilly. If I hit smooth preview right now, we get a really perfectly curved surface. Let me actually add our material to this so we can actually kind of see those highlights there. Those highlights roll off that surface. So just notice how smoothly and uniformly that highlight rolls around that surface, right? Now, let's unsmooth it. And let's just, with our multi-cut tool, let's just add in an edge loop right there, right? Now we'll smooth it, and now we'll look at, let me turn I don't know if you'll be able to see this well. This is a very subtle thing, right? You can see it though, right? See how you see where we added that edge loop? You can see it right in here. And then as we roll over that surface, it kind of jumps, that highlight kind of jumps a little bit. This is one of those things that can add like lumpiness to your model. So you want to be very careful about adding edge loops like this. And the reason this happens, if we kind of look down the length of this surface, you see that when we add an edge loop, that area is flat, right? So typically what I do when I add an edge loop like this is I'll come in and then adjust it a little bit to kind of, round it out. And this works pretty well on like non-spherical round surfaces, right? So like our hood there is like it's a round surface, but it's not a spherical surface, right? More of an organic surface, I guess. So that works okay with like non-spherical round surfaces. So you can kind of get away with just manually moving it around sometimes. But I want to show you a couple other little things, a couple other ways to sort of add divisions like this, and not kind of help that situation, right? So one of the ways you can do this is if you add an edge loop like this, and then you select that edge or edge loop, you can select the whole edge loop or just part of it by double clicking. And then I think it's all shift. Let me get so if you hold down shift and right click and hold, you can come down, you get this marking menu, this really handy marking menu, which has a lot of really cool tools in it, like bevel edge, there's your multi-cut tool right there. I should actually get better at using this tool, because this is specific to your component selection. So right now you can see that it has delete edge, multi-cut, extrude edge. But if I were to switch to like vertices, shift right click, now this is specific to vertices. So it's a really cool marking menu. if you get used to using it, it's probably something that I should get used to using. But one of the really cool features in this is if you hold down Shift and right click, you can come down to Edit Edge Flow, and that will attempt to adjust that edge for you so you get a nice smooth surface. Now, sometimes it's not perfect. You can still see that highlight, right? And we can see a little bit of it right there as we roll around that surface. So it's not in any way perfect, but sometimes that can help you get rid of that flat spot, because if you just add edge loops like that, that's basically the issue. Is it's just creating flat spots in your geometry. And when you have a really smooth round surface, flat spots are no good. You don't want to have flat spots in your geometry. Another way you could do this, you could just bevel the edge, right? So like say in this case right here, say I have this edge. It might work if I bevel it, but basically just beveling the edge is going to split this edge up and sort of divide it into two. So I could just try beveling this edge and adjusting it this way, but you can see that that still creates kind of a flat area there. And we can adjust like the depth if we want, but you can see that that's still kind of creating that flat surface there. Typically, if you want to do something that's circular like this and make it really high resolution, you want to put a lot of thought into how dense you want it to be as an end result, right? So this is not something that, like, say I'm going to cut a hole in this cylinder at some point. I'd want to go ahead and make this a very dense mesh because it's going to be more difficult to add in subdivisions and have it look round later on. So if I anticipate I'm modeling something like this and I anticipate that I want to cut a hole in it at some point, the ideal thing to do is just make it with a lot of subdivision levels, so you don't have to add any later. That's kind of like the ideal situation, but we're not always in the ideal situation. The other thing that you can try is to go into your multi-cut tool. So if you double click your multi-cut tool, you're going to get this menu right here. And you can turn on this option for edge flow. And you can just kind of mess around with your default settings. Leave it at default to begin with, but you can mess around with this if you want to tweak it a little bit. But when you turn on edge flow and then you use your multi-cut tool, you'll notice that, let me go back into object mode here. You'll notice that whenever I do add an edge loop like that, it will adjust the angle of that edge loop. That also helps a lot. That's probably, so far out of the ways that I've showed you, that's probably the most effective way of doing that, but we can still see that the highlight changes, right, as we're moving that up and down. So I just want to make you mindful of that, right? So don't just go in and start adding edge loops willy-nilly and then just leaving them. And then later you come back and you're like, why does that surface look a little bit lumpy or a little weird? It's probably because you've just added an edge loop in a way that is just going to create a flat spot. So I still have my multi-cut set to edge flow. So I'm just going to try adding an edge loop right here with that edge flow feature turned on. And we'll just see how that looks, right? So I'm going to add an edge loop. We can see the whole thing kind of bump a little bit. So now let's look at it in smooth mode. And again, let's kind of look at our highlights and everything. All of our highlights, I think, look pretty good. It's a very subtle change. But my point here is that you don't want to just go in and start adding a bunch of edge loops, right? Like, for example, if I wanted to round this out more, and I had that feature turned off. Now, I like having it turned off because I like knowing if it's doing that or not, because sometimes this can mess up. It can result in something that you don't want sometimes. And I like having it off more than I like having it on, I guess is the right way to say that. Just because I feel like I have more control, but just knowing it's there and you can turn it on can help you out a lot. But my main point with this is you don't want to just go in and start adding edge loops like this and forgetting about them, because what's going to happen here, like right in here, we see this is flat, this is flat, this is flat, right? So then when we smooth that, we're going to get kind of this undulating surface that is not particularly round, and we can really see that on this corner right here. See how this highlight kind of undulates a little bit? That's because we've added all those edge loops. So I just want to make you mindful of that before we move forward. And it's something you want to just, again, it's something you just want to be mindful of in case you ever run into that issue, right? So always be very careful about just adding in a bunch of edge loops at once, because that is like, that's the quickest way to make your model look lumpy, is just going in and adding in a bunch of edge loops. So otherwise, you generally want to be very intentional about how you're adding in your edge loops. So I just wanted to add in that edge loop right there because I feel that's going to be helpful for us when we add our fender flare here. Now I'm going to do the fender flare in kind of a pretty unique way here, where we just kind of combine two objects, and these are pretty subtle fender flares. Right, if we look at both of these are kind of just like a subtle swoop, and they kind of roll under right here. So, and it just flare out, again, analyze and dissect your reference, right? Before you start just creating stuff, your brain will sort of abstract it down to its most simplest form. And a lot of times you'll just create that simple form, right? And you're not really analyzing the subtleties of those shapes and forms. So really, before you just start adding forms, kind of dissect those simple forms, right? This one in particular just kind of starts from like right around here and just kind of flares out a little bit. So the way that I'm going to create this is we're going to start with a cylinder. All right, so we're actually jumping back into a time lapse. I will show you the end result of this. This is me sort of starting to work on the fender flares in a specific way, and I'm explaining everything. And the reason I'm showing you this in a time lapse is because I actually kind of screw up. I don't want to say I screw up, but I make a mistake, right? And the result of that mistake is me going back and completely doing it with a different approach. However, again, I don't like doing things off camera. I didn't want to cut this whole thing out because I think it's worth sort of talking about and talking through. And, a lot of times we watch these YouTube videos and we just see everything. We see the person doing the thing like absolutely perfectly step by step, and they don't, maybe they make a few mistakes, but a lot of the mistakes just don't end up on the video, right? And it looks like a very easy, streamlined process, right? They have everything nailed down. They've put a lot of production quality into their YouTube videos. And that's probably something that I need to get better at too, is having a little bit better production quality. But they edit all the mistakes out, and I think it's worth seeing those mistakes. And it's not really, all of this isn't a mistake. I do a lot of this the correct way, and the end result, if you're just looking at the car, is not so bad. It turns out pretty good. But the crucial mistake that I make is I'm not looking at all of my orthographic views as I'm doing this. and you'll kind of see that here in a moment. But I'm not checking all my orthographic views, so I'm kind of checking them here, and I'm lining that up in the front view. But what I'm missing is the size of that inner ring is not matching my side view, so it's not matching the sort of profile curve of the fender flare or the wheel well. So I do all this work, and then at some point I take a look at my side view, and I'm like, oh, I have to like completely redo all this stuff. And then I decide I'm going to just take a different approach to it, a slightly different approach. And I have that, after this time lapse, you'll see all that stuff in real time. So I will walk you through and talk you through all of that stuff. But I think it's important to see mistakes. I think it's important to see the thought process and the problem solving that happens in a project like this. And, nobody's perfect. I think a lot of times for me, when I spent a lot of time learning from YouTube videos. And back when I was in college, we had there's this website called Digital Tutors. And this was before YouTube tutorials and things really blew up. So we used this thing called Digital Tutors. You had to pay for it. I think it was like $20 a month or something like that. And they had all these great videos that you could learn from, and it sort of paved the way for YouTubers in a lot of ways. So I spent a lot of time learning from videos, and a lot of those videos made you feel like you were doing everything wrong because the way that they did it is like, oh, it's just so easy. You do this and you do that and it's done. So you spend a lot of time just like self-reflecting, like, what am I doing wrong? Why am I not getting the same results? And, a lot of times you just kind of miss steps. You look away for a second and you completely miss something, or, in defense of the people recording the lecture videos too, sometimes you get on a roll and you forget to talk about things. And so that it's not necessarily anything against people out there recording YouTube videos. They're kind of they're doing a good deed by sharing their knowledge with the world. And that's kind of why I share this stuff too, is because I just want to kind of share people who want to get better at this. I want to share everything that I've learned with them. But my point is, sometimes you kind of get lost in you kind of get lost in the fact that you're struggling with something, and but the videos you're following just make it look so easy because they edit out all the mistakes. And maybe it's not necessarily they're editing out all the mistakes. Maybe they just know the software and know the process so well that they don't make any mistakes. But it's very important to understand that everybody makes mistakes and not everything works out. And I tell people to start over a lot, and they don't like that. I think here you're going to get a chance to see me start over, right? You see me go down this path, and I get kind of caught up in the moment, just talking about my process and everything. Here this is an important thing. Here I'm making a note for myself. In the attribute editor, you can make notes, which is a very underused section of Maya, I think. So you can make notes to go back and fix things. So that's something that you should definitely use, something that I need to use more often. But anyway, back to the matter at hand. I mess up. I get distracted by just the fact that I'm recording a lecture video, and I make a pretty crucial mistake that makes everything that I'm doing right now pointless. Not necessarily pointless. Everything's a learning opportunity. I definitely learned a lesson from this. Mainly that I need to just check my views more often, check my orthographic views more often. But, it's an important thing to know. People make mistakes. It's not always a step-by-step process, and a lot of this stuff is figuring things out. There I was just explaining that when you hit your delete key, it will just delete edges with only two or delete verts with only two edges attached to it. So you just have to be careful with deleting your corners, because generally your corners, like that one down there at the bottom left, only has two edges attached to it, and I don't want to delete it. I think here I'm just kind of explaining that I'm not sure. I don't remember what I'm explaining right here, but yeah, I'm just kind of trying to clean up the geometry. I'm doing all this work. And then in a moment, I think you'll see me look at my side view, and I realize that the entire shape, although everything looks good, right? Not comparing it to my orthographic views, everything here is starting to look really good, and all the shapes and forms kind of blend together really nicely. But you'll see here in a moment when I look at I think I have it pretty much completely finished whenever I go and take a look at my side view, and I'll realize that the sort of diameter of that fender flare is way off. And I have a moment of realization where I'm going to have to redo the whole thing. And my first thought was like, I don't want to record this. I don't want to back up and record this all over again. I was going to edit the whole thing out. But then I was like, no, I'll just leave this in. We'll do a time lapse of voiceover of me just explaining how much of a dummy I am. I'm not checking everything. But again, it's an important thing to talk about. We learn, we still make mistakes. You're never gonna stop making mistakes. And I think a lot of the confidence you see when you see artists work, whether they're a painter or doing a drawing or something, and I get a lot of students that will ask me like, how do people just get confidence in their strokes when they're drawing and things like that. Hey, here's where I realize that I'm wrong. Here's where I realize I kind of screwed up. But I think that confidence not comes from like knowing that you're going to make the right decision whenever you make a stroke or draw a line or paint a paint daub. That's not where the confidence comes from. The confidence comes in that knowing it doesn't matter if you make a mistake. Knowing that you can fix that mistake. That's where the confidence comes from. And when you see these people drawing and they're drawing like really freely, and it's because they don't care if they make a mistake, right? It's because they know they can go back and fix their mistakes. And sometimes you get happy accidents from those mistakes. But I think that's a very important distinction to make, is your confidence doesn't come from doing the right thing. Your confidence comes from being a good problem solver and knowing that you can solve that problem when you create it for yourself. So I think a lot of people get confused with where they see confidence come from, and they think it's the confidence to make each individual stroke correctly, or do every little step correctly. But that's not at all where the confidence comes from. The confidence is from knowing that you can correct your mistakes, knowing that you have the skill and abilities to correct those mistakes. It's not from knowing that you're not going to make mistakes. So here's where I'm basically deciding I'm going to do this in a whole different way. And then we're about to jump back into real time. And I'm going to walk you through how I actually end up doing the fender flares. Let's try this a different way. Let's just take a cylinder And we want to rotate this 90 degrees. Again, this has a lot to do with what I said in the last video where I don't really have a plan, right? I'm just sort of figuring things out as I go. And that is what art is. There's not a book that I'm reading saying, okay, this is the next step. This is the next step, right? Just sort of figuring things out as I go. So I think I'm actually going to use booleans to kind of give me this cutaway. So let's get it right first. This is going to be weird. I do actually have a plan for how I want to approach this, but this might be a little bit weird. The way that my mind's working right now, but we're going to try it. So my plan is to use booleans to trim out the circle from this shape. And then I can use that shape to kind of fold it back into this shape. So it's going to be weird, but just bear with me. There's a method to my madness. So let's try this. Let's go ahead and save it first in case we crash, because that's always a possibility. And let's try booleans, right? So let's go in and I'm going to select my car body. Let's go ahead and delete the history on everything first. Always very important. And freeze our transforms. Okay. And we're going to just delete this half. It's going to go away anyway. So we're just going to delete that half. And I'm going to select this, shift select my car model here, and we're going to go to mesh, booleans. Let's try slice. That did the opposite of what we wanted. So let's undo that. Selection order is very important when you're doing booleans. So let's select our car first and then select this. And then we'll go to mesh, booleans, slice. That's basically what we wanted right there. Right, we just want that to cut around that shape here. Okay, so then we can delete our history on this, and that will get rid of that Boolean function. We just wanted that slice. That's all we did that for. This is for the slice there. And so if I select my car and delete history, the whole Boolean operation goes away. Now we're still going to be using kind of the same method we did before, just a little bit different to get that initial slice. So I'm going to trim all this off. I'm going to try not to delete any of my verts here because we want to mainly keep our cylinder verts. Try to make sense of that here in a second. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all of these that we sliced here, this whole ring. So to select that, I'm just selecting this first one, shift double clicking this one over here, and it will select the span in between. All right, and then I'm going to extrude these outward like that. That's fine, doesn't need to be crazy. We're going to actually use this to, it'll make sense, I promise. So now what I want to do is clean up this a little bit. So I'm just going to go through and delete all of these edges that are sort of in a flat spot here. Again, you're probably thinking, what is he doing? What is the plan here? Hopefully it'll make sense once we get to the point. So I'm just deleting all of the edges around this cylinder shape that were that are on a flat surface. So like all of these here. Right. So we're just getting that initial cylinder flat shape back. That's important because we want this to look round. And with all these edges in here, when we smooth it, it's not going to look round. Right, so I want to keep that one. Now, again, there's a lot of ingons here. It's 100% fine. We will solve those. Okay, so what I can do from here is I can just move these to kind of get that shape, and I'm just going to move them around in this axis. So in this axis, I don't want to move them like this. I'm just going to move them in this axis. So let's start with these top two right here. Jump to our front view, and I just kind of want to move these where they sort of align where I want them to be, like this. I'm not thinking about the curve or anything. I think this back one kind of curves around like this. I think, figuring out things like this is one of the things I absolutely love about 3D modeling, right? You find these very unique solutions to problems like this, and you kind of get like these dopamine hits of, I did that, I figured that out, and I figured it out in a really cool way. It kind of makes you feel pretty good about yourself once you actually do sort of figure these things out. So I'm just kind of moving these around to where they kind of, again, this is messy geometry, but we're going to just delete this face. And we'll delete this face as well. And then we're just left with this. Right, so now this round, this is not our fender flare at all, right? But this round part will match our reference now. So that's the important part that we wanted to get. Now, what I want to try is grabbing our cylinder edges around here. And we're going to extrude those outward like this. And I want this to go up to where that fender flare goes up to. It actually goes up pretty high, probably like halfway up that surface there. So probably somewhere around there. And then we're going to move that in like that. And then I can add in an edge loop. Good. I still had edge flow turned on, so it kind of adjusted that for me. That's okay. I think I kind of like that. Right. So now we can kind of pick up with that other method where we left off. Now, the problem is that these are facing the wrong direction. We're going to fix that. But for now, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. I think, if anything, this is actually helping me. It's going to help me kind of trim this a little bit. All right. So let's actually trim this. Same way we did before. I'm just going to try to get as close as I can to those points. Not not concerning myself with the ingons, right? Let me turn off that edge flow. And then we'll trim this black part here. I also want to point out that this might not work either, right? It kind of ends right in here anyway, so I'm just going to end it right there. And then we'll trim all the excess off. And I know this is kind of confusing to look at the way that it is, but just trust me. Let's go ahead and add in another cut all the way down here. Sometimes you have to like just trim off a little bit at a time, but basically we want to trim this until all we have left is like that hole. I also know that there's probably some people in here watching this video. It's like there's such a better way to do this. And you're probably right. But this is the way that I've kind of figured out how to do things over the years. We'll go ahead and delete this interior part here as well. Just to simplify things. Now, so what we're left with once we do that is we have this cut out. We can go in and start joining these up together, but basically part of my surface here is facing inward and parts facing outward. So we want to conform our normals. So I'm going to select my entire piece of geometry here and go to mesh display, conform. If that doesn't work, probably what we want to do is just select these faces and go to mesh display reverse. All right, now let's try to start joining these together. Before we had an edge loop right here, I probably should have added an extra edge loop right there when we initially created that sphere. But I'm going to have the same issue to fix there that we had before. Let's add in an edge loop right there. I think we did a slice here. Let's try to do this in a way where we don't go all the way through. Yeah, that worked. And then we'll use our multi-cut to kind of reroute this geometry. And start joining this together with bridge. Same way we did before. I think for this one right here, I'm just going to delete that for the moment. And I'm going to delete this one too, which will just leave an N-gon there that we can fix later. Same with this one, just delete that one. Let's try to, we'll go ahead and delete this one too. And we'll target weld this to here, bridge that up. This one we can just kind of reroute that to there like that and get rid of that one. Again, bridge these two together. And then we're going to target weld that. I have a little floating vert right there. Again, if you want to get rid of a vert that's sort of like a floating vert like that, if you just hit delete, it will only delete verts that are connected to two edges. So if I select all three of these, it's not going to delete these two. It's only going to delete this one because these are connected to more than two edges, right? Let's smooth that, just take a look at it. Right now, I'm just kind of looking at the transition, right? This is something we'll have to deal with in a moment, but right now I just want to get this connected and I want to look at that transition. Let's play with these edges a little bit. Bridge that. And I'm just gonna target weld a couple of these. So I'm just gonna target weld here to here, here to here. Let's actually just go all the way down there like that. And let's smooth that, see what it looks like. Not too bad. There's a few little weird things right there I probably want to deal with and fix. And then we have a lot of N-gons here we want to deal with and fix. But overall, that transition looks pretty good. If anything, it's a little bit of a sharp transition. I may want to soften it a little bit. I'm okay with the way this crease fades out into here. I'm not okay with the way this crease fades out into here. So this is something we want to deal with later. For this part right here, I think I'm just going to try to optimize this a little bit by target welding. Some of these together. Maybe target weld this up here like that. See how that looks. Again, you know, as you can see from all the mistakes that I made before, I don't really have a plan for this. I'm just trying things. And if they work, they work. If they don't, they don't. And, you know, if I were trying to give you something that just is easy to follow and step by step, I would have edited all of that out. But I think it's important for you to see problem solving, right? It's important for you to see how we kind of work through these issues. And it's important to see that the perfect way is not always necessarily the right way. It's almost never perfect, right? It's almost never a step by step process. There's always issues that you're going to run into. It's just the way that it is. I'm going to try to do something like this for this one. And see if we can just run this one down here. That looks a little bit better. So we still have some ingons here to fix. I will probably end up doing those in a time lapse. So I'm gonna kind of save those for later, and we'll just go over. We'll do like one video just on solving ingons and things like that. And say, let's go ahead and take this and just extend this little edge loop all the way down.
Mhm.
All right, I think that looks pretty good. I think that looks good enough to move forward. Again, we do have ingons that we have to fix, but we'll come back to those at a later time. So let's do the rear fender flare now. And I'm just going to do it kind of the same way. So we'll create a cylinder. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees. Maybe this one will go a little bit easier for us. We're going to put that in position. I also think it's important to point out that I didn't necessarily have anyone teaching me how to do this stuff. So if it is a little bit unorthodox, it's because I was kind of left to my own devices when I'm figuring this stuff out. And I think that's an important thing to point out. A lot of us, do that, right? A lot of us kind of just figure things out on our own, and we sort of develop these techniques. And sometimes that's not always the perfect technique, but it is a technique that works. So let's see, we had the other one, we had 18 or 16, I think. So let's try to do the same number. All right, so we have that there. Again, all I really want here is the slice, so I don't care about the cylinder. So we'll select our car, shift select our cylinder, mesh, Boolean, slice. Whoa, see that subdivided our model like that? We don't want that. Let's undo. And it probably did that to get rid of those ingons. So that might be something we have to fix. But first, let's just try deleting our history and freezing our transforms. Let's try that again. Yeah, see, it wants to subdivide our model. That's not something we want to do. And I think it's because we have these ingons here. So what I'm going to do as a temporary solution to that issue is just delete these ingons. and we can go back and fix them later. I think it's just the two. And probably this one right here. So yeah, let's just go ahead and delete that one as well. All right, let's see if that works now. So once again, I'm going to freeze transforms, delete history. There we go. Yeah, so it was just doing that because we had n-gons in our mesh. So if you just delete your n-gons, you can fill them back in later. So just to show you that, we'll go ahead and delete our history so we get rid of that Boolean function. So we just have our slice. And now I can just fill these back in with mesh fill hole, right? And then we're going to trim all of this fat away. We're going to do the same thing where we just grab this whole circular part and extrude that outward. This is going to be hard to see from our front, so let's kind of do it from the side. I kind of think that this looks like it's extending out a little bit further than what we can see here. So I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit compared to our orthographic view. I think that's okay to do sometimes. So I'm going to pull this out a little bit further beyond what we have. Maybe even in line with our front fender flare. Okay, and then I'm going to, again, we're going to trim or just kind of delete all the edges that are on a flat surface because we only want our cylinder edges, if that makes sense. Control delete. Select these guys and extrude. Give it some thickness. This probably goes up about, about where our key is going to be for our front door. So maybe somewhere around there. We can move that inward like that. For this one, I'm going to add in an edge loop, but I'm going to kind of keep it straight because I feel like this kind of flares in a straight line out and doesn't round over like our front one does. And in fact, I could even probably, if I look at some other reference here, see this one does look like it flares over kind of in a round. Can barely see it there. Yeah, I'm not sure. For the sake of consistency, I might edit it and just take out this edge loop right here to flatten that whole area out. Let's go ahead and do it. Just see what it looks like. Aside from this messiness right here, I actually think that looks better. So we're going to leave it like that. I think we're just going to leave this one like that too. I'm going to go ahead and delete these interior edges. Just it'll make it a little bit easier for us because now we can reverse these. We want to. We can reverse the normals on these. Mesh display reverse, and now we can do our trimming. The closer you trim to where these two surfaces meet, the sharper that crease is going to be. This is a pretty soft transition between these two shapes, so that's why I'm giving it a little bit of a gap. But if I wanted there to be a really sharp crease, then I would trim this really close to where those two surfaces meet. In this case, I'm not going to do that. And there is one little thing that I forgot about, and that is to move these in where they start to match the shape of the body. Let's find a reference again. All right, something like that. So now we'll go through and trim our shapes. Again, I'm leaving a gap because I want that to be kind of a soft transition. I don't want it to be a sharp transition. Not worried about this, how it's kind of crossing over, because we will solve that issue at some point. All right, so just something like that. If I can get it to commit. There we go. It's weird. It played my YouTube instead of doing what I wanted. Okay, now let's trim around the other side. Again, I'm going to just beeline it for those points matching my cylinder shape here. So just straight line it all the way across. That will help me maintain that round shape, right? If I'm not adhering or not trying to line things up with these edges of my cylinder, then it's not going to give me as round of a shape. So I'm just beelining it straight to those sections with my multi-cut tool. Here it kind of starts to taper in. So here we can just kind of do something like this. All right, and then we're going to trim away the excess on both pieces. You guys are watching this and thinking to yourself, there's a much easier way to go about this. Please let me know in the comments. I would love to know a more streamlined way to do it. This is just, out of all the different ways that I've tried, this is just the way that, I guess it's a combination of the way that I enjoy doing it the most and the way that works the best for me, right? All right, so now let's fix this stuff, bridge these guys together. And again, for a lot of these that are creating these n-gons, we're just going to make them n-gons. This one, I think I will kind of, I will sort of extend this down here. We could have used my target weld tool for that, but and then for now we'll just extend this one up. See, I'm looking at this and that shape right there kind of dies off really quickly. So I'm not sure if I want to deal with that the same way. This one I'm going to I made a little accidental slice right there. So let's go ahead and fix that. Now, if you have an area like this that you want to fill in, but it's going to create an end-on, that's fine too. I'm just going to bridge this together. And then I can, in this area, I can just do mesh fill hole. And that will fill that in. Let's bridge these two. And then I'm going to target weld that to there. Sort of target weld a lot of this stuff up together. Probably do the same thing. With these two in terms of just filling it in. Let's bridge these two together. I think the way that I like to think about this is let me just get all the surfaces there first, and then we'll talk about like how to reroute geometry and stuff like that. What you can do here in this situation is just fill in that whole thing. So mesh fill hole. And then we can just connect that up. Yeah, I mean, overall, I think that looks pretty good. Again, there's still a lot of issues we can fix with Ngons and stuff. We'll talk about that in the next lecture video. We'll just kind of make it a video about cleanup, because I think the next thing I want to do after I get all these Ngons cleaned up is just subdivide the entire mesh. Because this, for the most part, is our primary form, right? We still need to do the back part here. But for the most part, this is our car body almost finished. So we just need to kind of clean up all the Ngons, deal with all the, the nuances of like the little shapes and stuff that we want to emphasize, and then we can subdivide and reduce. So I don't want to just subdivide. I do like to subdivide and then go back and reduce some of the edges. So we're going to do that. The next video, we're just going to focus on cleanup, and then we'll subdivide, smooth, and then we can start working on other parts of our model.